Hello, hello, and welcome to another edition of the Power Hour. We are very excited to bring you our candidate forum as we continue our candidate forum series with our district attorney forum this evening. We reached out to all the candidates who are running, and today we're very excited to be sitting down with district attorney candidate for Allegheny County, Matt Dugan. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
And we know that this is one of the most important races in the county. Can you just talk a little bit about what a district attorney does and why this race is so important?
Sure. So, the district attorney is the chief law enforcement officer in, their jurisdiction. So in a county the size of Allegheny, 1.25 million people, it's a really, really big job. And, really they're the head of the criminal justice system. So they get to set policy, they get to set procedure. And what makes the district attorney's position so important and really so powerful is its discretion. So, that we can set priorities with respect to which crimes we want to charge, how we want to charge them, whether we want to charge them at all, how we dispose of cases. We can work with and direct police departments as to, how we want to, what crimes we're going to prioritize and which crimes we're not. So we really have the ability in 2023 to do something really different. I'm running on a unapologetically reform-based campaign because, we've had the same district attorney here for 24 years, 2.5 decades, and the criminal justice system just isn't working. So the district attorney's office really has the ability to impact a lot of lives and really has the ability to impact a lot of people's futures as well.
Mm-hmm. And so you said it's a really big job. What caused you to want to run for this office?
Sure. So I'm currently the chief public defender of Allegheny County. I've been with the public defender's office for a little bit over 16 years. And, I've held pretty much every job in that office, from little baby lawyer, walking into court the first day, didn't know what he was doing. Figured it out after a year or so, moved on to the trial department where I tried a bunch of cases, juries and non-juries, and, really, had the opportunity to represent thousands of individual clients. And, for the past 5-6 years, I've had the opportunity to lead the office, first as chief deputy and now as director. And that has taken me out of the courtroom and allowed me an opportunity to work more on system-wide reform. And, it gives me, I think, I've had the ability with all those different positions to have, I think, a unique seat as to and eyes on the criminal justice system. And, the truth is, the reason I'm running for district attorney is because as good as we're doing at the public defender's office, the system itself is just not designed to be led by a public defender. The system moves at the pace at which the district attorney's office moves, and the policies and procedures and initiatives that the district attorney's office is invested in, the criminal justice system is forced to respond to that. So, I've talked about the need for reform. That's where you can make the most reform.
When you talk about running on reform, what are some of the issues that, let's say day one, week one, you want to review, and some of the policies that you think should change to make Allegheny a more safe and just place? Sure.
So, before even day one, let's talk a little bit about how our system isn't working, if that's okay right now. Our system does a really good job of cycling folks through a system and never really addressing the core issues that bring people in the first place. And I'm sure that we're going to talk about, violent crime and the rise in violent crime. But the truth is, the vast majority of folks who come before the criminal justice system in Allegheny County are low-level nonviolent offenders. These are folks who, the circumstances, mostly dictate, their entry into the criminal justice system. And what we've been talking about is, the three drivers, the three main drivers that bring people into the criminal justice system: substance abuse issues, untreated, undiagnosed mental health issues, and instability, poverty, lack of access to properly funded schools, lack of access to good paying jobs, lack of access to proper medical care, living in areas where there's food deserts, underfunded schools, if I said that all right. Our system puts people through, from the arrest, prosecute, punish model. And we cycle thousands of folks through this system a year without ever connecting folks to services or giving them a chance to move out of the criminal justice system. So, my opponent and folks talk about all these options that are available in Allegheny County, all these diversion programs. And the truth is that we don't have diversion programs in Allegheny County. We have treatment courts, and, treatment courts work, meaning once you attach folks to the services they need, mental health services, drug and alcohol services, job programs, things like that, we know that keeps people from coming back into the criminal justice system. The way our treatment courts are structured now is that you need to demonstrate the need for entry into those programs. And how do you demonstrate that need? You do that by failing multiple times in the criminal justice system. So you're coming into these treatment courts with 4, 5, 6 prior convictions. And what I'm talking about is that's way too, the train is too far down the tracks at that point. A criminal conviction is life altering. It will stay with you until death. Unless you get a governor's pardon, there's no way to get rid of a criminal conviction. And for low-level nonviolent folks suffering from one of those three things, substance abuse, mental health, instability, a criminal conviction can really just create so much chaos and so much more instability, and can threaten sobriety, and can threaten mental health, and just creates more instability in of itself. So if we can get upstream, if we can identify low-level nonviolent folks when they first enter the system, and we can offer them connection to services, and we can get people to successfully complete that, or give them the option to do that, we can start moving cases out of the criminal justice system. And that's where a district attorney and their discretion is so important. You don't always have to seek convictions, especially for our low-level folks, right? So, if we can divert people out of the criminal justice system, then that's a win. It's a win for that person. It's a win for the system itself.
I think it's very important to note, because you brought it up, that currently, even to get into the treatment courts and other programs, you have to plead guilty.
Yep.
And so that is why that distinction is very important. And to follow up, and since you mentioned it already, I think we go ahead and move this conversation. A lot of progressive prosecutors, reformists, we've been seeing right now with the mayoral election in Chicago, when people see reformers to the criminal justice system, the first question is, but what about violence? But what about violent crime? Can you talk about ways district attorneys are able to implement reform while also addressing violent crime? Because there are people, they watch the news and they get very concerned. And we know that this is a cycle, especially with summer. People are out. We know crime is going to go up during the summer. What are some of the things that district attorneys can do to address violent crime?
Sure. So I really do believe that moving low-level nonviolent folks out of the system is a violence prevention method, first and foremost. Number one, because we're not forcing people into repeated, decision making and criminal justice involvement. But number two, it frees resources, it frees time, it frees attention for prosecutors to focus on the prosecution of violent crime. But what we're talking about is not just the prosecution and competently prosecuting violent crime when it does occur, but what we're talking about in our campaign, and the message we've been talking about across the county, is the opportunity to think differently about the criminal justice system and what a district attorney can do, not just to react to crime, but to work to prevent it. So we have a concurrent county executive election, which you had your forum last week. We have a mayor who is in the infancy of his first term. We have state and local lawmakers. We need a district attorney's office who's willing to partner, who's willing to collaborate, who's willing to communicate with all of these stakeholders. Because as the district attorney's office functions now, it does so in a silo. It has no partners, it has no collaboration, which leaves them really only one option, which is to respond to crime, right? So we need to do more than just that. We need to work to get into, areas, especially areas most impacted by gun violence, and start working on prevention. So, progressive prosecution, progressive prosecutors, and I don't use that word anymore, because like you said, it's been sort of co-opted and weaponized. When someone says progressive prosecutor, I'm not even sure what they mean. We talk about reform. We are unapologetic about our need to reform the system, but it's always safety minded, but it's also preventative, right? We want to get in front of these issues. We cannot accept as fact that certain areas of our county are just going to be plagued by gun violence. We can't accept that. And it's the district attorney's, I think, legal and moral duty to talk about ways that we can prevent it.
And going back to the district attorney's office, there has been ongoing conversation about the diversity of the office and what that means for the community. We know that Black people are overrepresented, not only in convictions and incarcerations, but also the prosecutions within this county. If you are to win and become the next district attorney, what plan do you have in place or thinking about to make the office more reflective of the community it's serving?
Sure. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done at the public defender's office to address that issue. So, we hired and we employ a full-time director of recruiting and retention, because for years we would wait for attorneys to apply to our office, and we would hire people one off, meaning, one in, one out, one in, one out. And it really wasn't, number one, it wasn't getting us the best public defenders that we could get. We weren't doing anything proactive. We were in that reactive state, and it wasn't helping us expand diversity in our office as well. So what we started doing was, first and foremost, we defined what it means to be a public defender. And, so we have a mission statement, which is, it is our constitutional duty to provide the best and most zealous representation to the most marginalized folks in our county. And we went about changing our office and changing the culture of our office by having fidelity to that mission statement. And that meant every hiring decision we made, not just our lawyers, but our social workers, our investigators, our support staff. But we recognized the importance of going out and getting really good attorneys, right? So we started going to Washington, D.C. and all these different job fairs across the country, and we started recruiting at specific law schools, HBCUs, because we wanted it with the explicit goal and intent of bringing more diversity to the office, because it is important. It is important when you're serving the public to be representative of the public. So we would bring that same model to the district attorney's office. But first and foremost, we need to have that tether. We need to have that ideology in place, which is, what is the mission statement? Because right now I'm pretty confident that they don't have a mission statement. And, we would stress that we must recognize the humanity of all folks coming before the criminal justice system. That includes witnesses, that includes victims, that includes defendants as well. So we need to go out and be, when we come into the district attorney's office, we will hire a director of recruiting. We will hire an in-house director of training. We will train our own people. We're not going to outsource that, because we want our prosecutor's office to have that same culture that we've developed. It's going to be slightly different than the public defender's office, but we want that culture. We want folks to understand the humanity of folks and understand the lifelong consequences of a decision they make in a case, and how it's going to impact victims, and how it's going to impact defendants, and how it's going to impact neighborhoods. So we're going to define for the office what it means to work in a reform-minded prosecutor's office. And then we're going to go out and make hiring decisions based on that mission statement. And then we will take it upon ourselves, and it will be our responsibility to train and support and make sure that everybody's moving forward with that mission in mind.
You talk about the mission statement. A lot of times people view justice as a conviction. How do you define justice for yourself, and how does that inform the work that you do?
Yeah. So, we talk to young lawyers when we hire them, because, they get real fixated on like win-loss rate. And that's really not what it's about at all, because, you know, success is different in every case. You know, you've got different facts, you've got different circumstances, you've got different clients, whatever the case may be. You can't go by conviction, right? Um, our goal is not going to be to get the most amount of convictions or the most amount of probation or the most amount of jail time. That's not justice. What we want to do is we want to be even-handed. We want equity. We want equality. We want fair results. We want victim input. We want to talk about restorative justice and give victims the opportunity to resolve things outside of court, outside of, you know, a carceral setting. So, you know, really what we want is we want to engage more people. We want the public to be involved, which is why we've talked about community advisory boards. We've talked about, you know, having monthly forums where we are held accountable and we can hear from the public. We want to have integrity. We want to have accountability. We want to have transparency. I think, you know, until you have those three things, I don't think you can call anything a justice system, but we want to work towards that. You know, so no, it's not numbers based and it's not necessarily outcome based all the time, but we want to make sure that everybody who comes before the criminal justice system, number one, is well represented, is informed, has input, and feels respected. And you know, this is as a public defender, this has always been my favorite sort of like quirky social like fact, which is if folks go through the criminal justice process, even regardless of how their case ends as defendants, if defendants feel like they had a fair shake, that if they were treated fairly, if they were heard, if they were well represented, those folks are less likely to commit a future crime than folks who don't feel that way. So, you know, it's imperative that this process be transparent and fair and equal and equitable.
We talk about transparency all across the country. We see reports of exonerations, and people have gone back and looked at criminal convictions, and things have happened. We know right now we don't have standing in Allegheny County a committee that is dedicated to looking at old cases. Is that something that you have considered? And if so, what would that look like if you become district attorney?
Yeah, so within the first 100 days, we will have a up and running conviction integrity unit. That is absolutely essential to a system that wants to call itself a justice system. It's especially important here in Allegheny County because we've had the same district attorney for 2.5 decades, and they have not reviewed a single case, either before their time or during their time. And what's really problematic for me personally is we know who the head of homicide was at the district attorney's office under Steve Zappala for the better part of a decade. It was a judge who was recently removed from the bench, or I guess he resigned before they removed him, for being overtly racist in the courtroom. And this was the man who was responsible and for the oversight of every homicide prosecution for the better part of a decade. So absolutely, we are going to open a conviction integrity unit, and we will absolutely look at every single case he touched and every single case that he supervised. In addition to that, and you know, that department will also review ongoing cases, because I'm not going to say that like we're not going to make charging mistakes or that we're not going to get bad information or that, you know, things can't happen. We want to have the ability. So this conviction integrity will be a little bit, I just talked about not being in a silo, but they're going to be siloed. They're going to have some independence attached to them where they'll be having ongoing oversight of current matters as well. In addition to conviction integrity, we want to have a special investigations unit as well. Special investigations unit can work on public official fraud, but also police misconduct cases. And we want those attorneys and that department to be separate and apart from the daily operations of the district attorney's office, because if you're going to be reviewing police action, you don't necessarily want those lawyers having like ongoing relationships and ongoing matters with folks they're potentially investigating. So that's why it's going to be separate and apart, but it will be funded and it will be up and running within the first 100 days.
And you talked, you know, a little bit about the homicide investigations, there are a lot of people who have been hurt by the district attorney's office, a lot of communities who are going to have a severe distrust of any type of reform just because it's a district attorney's office. Have you sat and thought about the ways? I know you talked about committee meetings and forums, but have you also thought about the ways to reach back to these communities to bring them into, the prosecutor's office, to have some type of relationship? Because even if you're not going out to get convictions, you're still having to have a relationship in order to do your job.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back a little bit and talk about something we've done at the public defender's office, which was, we rolled out an initiative called Project Reset in 2019, and it was to offer expungement services for folks. And we ended up sort of bringing that show on the road, so to speak, right? So we actually go into communities and we do this. And the pandemic sort of got us off track a little bit, but you've seen us out. And expungement services, super valuable, right? But more important to me as head of the public defender's office was being in the neighborhoods, building trust, gaining some credibility. The district attorney's office has probably never had that, especially under district or under Steve Zappala. So there is a tremendous amount of work to do to build trust, not even trust first, to build a relationship and then earn that trust over time. That's going to take a long time. But that's where that's why what's so key is the transparency and openness and communication, to be able to have to be committed to those things. And what I've talked to folks about is, like, I'm asking to be held accountable. I'm not asking for trust right now. I am asking folks to make a change, but I'm not asking for trust. I'm asking for the ability to build that trust over time. And, there's a lot of, I've been to neighborhoods across the county, and there's a lot of good organizations on the ground who are doing violence prevention work, who are doing, who are invested in seeing, prosperity in their communities and seeing an end to violence. And the district attorney's office, I think, has the ability to give real voice and credence, and with partnerships with the county executive and mayor, resources to these groups, and connect them to police and district attorneys, such that we don't always have to have a police response. But, yes, I'm deeply invested in the idea of improving relationships between the district attorney's office and the community.
Here in Allegheny County, we do have a large resettlement population. We also have a large immigrant community, some who have legal status and some who do not. In your office, are you going to be working with ICE? And are you committed to having interpreters in your office for people who are coming through and wanting to make complaints?
We will not coordinate or work with ICE. Yes, we have language services. We do that now in the public defender's office. So if we can't get live interpreters in, we have an account where we can call, and within 5 minutes we can get almost any language in the world translated. So yes, we'll also, as part of our training for our attorneys, we will make sure that they are aware of immigration status of defendants, and that they should be vigilant in making sure that defense counsel is aware of potential immigration consequences. And when appropriate, we can, work, to resolve matters that have favorable outcomes for immigration consequences as well.
We started off talking about some of the treatment courts. Are you committed to creating an actual diversion program within Allegheny County? And if so, are you committed to removing the conviction requirement for a diversion program as it exists right now?
So the only definition of diversion that I accept is one that does not require a conviction. The diversion means move out of the criminal justice system. So yes, we will be doing a lot of that. And we talked about the opportunity to have what's called like an emerging courts, which is that time period in between 18 to 25, where kids are at that like fork in the road moment. And yeah, we can give folks and kids the opportunity to resolve matters without conviction. We also want to, there's pilot programs going on across the county right now with local police departments. This is without the support and voice of the district attorney, where we have law enforcement assisted diversion. So for, these low level nonviolent offenses, we can divert people pre-arrest. If we can, work with Department of Human Services and service providers, and we can do this prior to filing charges. So yeah, we want to expand the universe of cases that we are diverting out of the criminal justice system.
We know there's been a lot of research and articles about the way people who've been arrested for sex work has happened in this county. Do you have a plan or a policy idea of how you will be working with that community? We know in the past, if people had condoms, they were, charged, with having weapons, possession, all that type of stuff. Yeah. Have you thought about that, or are you not able to talk about that at this moment?
Oh no, I've thought about I've thought about almost everything. Well, that's not true. Yeah, so that is a perfect example of a class of offense that would be eligible for pre-arrest diversion, right? I've represented hundreds of people charged with sex work, and the overwhelming majority, I'm talking 99.9%, suffer from either mental health or substance abuse. It's a combination of the two. So, we also know we have Pride Court in Allegheny County, and that needs to be fixed. This is something that we can handle at the lower court level, and I would really invest a lot of time, energy, and resource into making this pre-arrest diversion, where we can get folks connected to work. This is something that we want to see, true diversion, pre-arrest.
We know right now in the city, we're doing looking at sitting the jury for the Tree of Life prosecution. We know that it has been reported that Pennsylvania has a lot of active hate crime organizations. We know the Pennsylvania legislature just introduced some hate crime legislation on the state level. But when you're talking about some of these cases, there is a real reality that there are going to be those ethnic intimidation cases. Have you thought about, or I know you thought about a lot of stuff, but so what is your plan to address some of the hate crimes and the fear that hate crimes are going to be rising just because of some of the political rhetoric that's going on in the area?
Yeah, that's a good question, especially, we've got a presidential election coming up next year, and gotta believe that the Republican nominee will be the one from 4 years ago. And yeah, that there's going to be some online spaces where there's going to be some stuff. That's something where our investigations department, we want to keep an active eye on that. We want to be able to monitor social media and make sure if there's something brewing, we know about it. We'll probably work with the FBI and the Attorney General's office to make sure that's the case. I mean, like you said, the Tree of Life shooting, that it appears though that Mr. Bowers was very active in some bad websites, and that's really tricky. Yeah.
You're currently the public defender for Allegheny County. If you're elected, that does create a lot of conflict of interest because basically right now, people who may have done some things, where to look. So what type of conflict of interest firewall policies are you looking at implementing, and how will you do that process?
Yeah. So, truthfully, I haven't represented a client. Well, I did a homicide trial last year, but my work is really system-wide, macro. It's not really in this, I'm not in the weeds. So there are a few cases, however, pending homicides, which I have worked on and I've spoken to people about, that we would probably number one, I would get an ethics opinion on this, but there's definitely one that we would have to conflict off of, which we would send to the Attorney General's office. Depending upon what happens in the election, I'd like to give them enough lead time such that I can create some space in between my time at the public defender's office and when we take over at the district attorney's office. But yeah, there are a handful of cases that we would look at conflicting out of.
And like, what firewall protections would you set for the future, or we wait for what the ethics board would recommend?
Truthfully, I don't. Besides these handful of cases, I actually don't see many conflicts beyond that. So I'm not sure that I would have to firewall off of anything. Or I'm sorry, firewall off of anything. Create a firewall such that I would have to like remove myself. No.
Fully understandable. If you are elected to become another district attorney, next district attorney, how are you planning on navigating the relationships? Because your job as a prosecutor is to be the prosecutor. Your job is not to be the public defender. And so how are you going to go about navigating those relationships? Because people may assume, oh, Matt's in there, I'm gonna get this like knocked out, and that may not be the case. So like, have you thought about like what that's going to look like?
So that goes to that question of like how can you jump from one side to the other? And what I've talked about is I think public defenders understand public safety, maybe even better than district attorneys who haven't had a real robust like experience representing folks, right? Like I talked about in the beginning, the vast majority of folks we see are low-level nonviolent folks. And, we really want to make sure that those folks are being served and not being harmed by the criminal justice system. And that goes back to training and working and making sure that our prosecutors understand that. I've been very clear on this campaign trail about, we will prosecute violent crime when it occurs. Because we hear from residents, we hear from folks in the county, they're concerned about violent crime, and that's every neighborhood that I go to. So, I'm concerned about, folks who are doing real harm to neighborhoods, harm to individuals. So, I don't know if anyone's going to be caught off guard, or if they are, they shouldn't be, because I've been talking about this stuff a lot. We're concerned about violent crime. And our low-level nonviolent folks, we want to get them connected to the services such that they don't come back.
And talk about violent crime. An issue of concern is the charging of youth as adults. Outside of murder, it really is very prevalent here in Allegheny County. What is your plan to address, felonies that youth are, allegedly committing, because you have the discretion to charge them as an adult, but you also understand what that long-term impact is going to look like for a community?
Yeah, so the Juvenile Act actually does take away a lot of that discretion, to be honest. So, if certain facts are alleged and there's a weapon involved, the district attorney actually doesn't have discretion as to decide where to initiate charges. Now, that being said, what if a juvenile is charged in adult court because the facts just demand it, that does not mean that the case has to stay there. And, it is incumbent upon defense counsel to request petition to decertify. And the district attorney's office has a lot to do with that. Now, I do believe that we should treat kids like kids, but I do think that some of the sort of mechanics of our Juvenile Act could be amended. First and foremost, I'd like to see an increase in like the age at which we lose jurisdiction. So right now in Pennsylvania, we lose jurisdiction of kids once they hit their 21st birthday. It's actually unique in this country. Like a lot of states actually have no time limit, and some go all the way up to 30 and 40. And the reason why I could see why I think raising that age limit would be beneficial is because the Juvenile Act and juvenile court and juvenile sentencing None of it is based on punishment. It's not punitive. It's all geared around rehabilitation, which is what is in the best needs of what are the needs of the child? What are in the best interests of the child? How can we rehabilitate? So if we have a kid who's, committed a violent crime at say 17 and a half, I know the adult system is not equipped to deal with a 17 and a half year old because they're not going to connect to the same services. They're not going to have the benefit of that. But do we have enough time on the back end? What we've done at the public defender's office, which is something we will do at the district attorney's office, is a few years ago, we asked the Heinz Foundation to fund a policy position for us, where we work with our the Democratic Judiciary Committee, the Judicial Committee, where any new law that's brought forth, any criminal law that's pending, we comment on it. So we tell the lawmakers, like, this is problematic, this is a good idea, this is a bad idea. So, we have the ability from the district attorney's office to do the same thing, to go to Harrisburg and say, this isn't working for us. And another big thing from the district attorney's office is the District Attorneys Association of Pennsylvania. It's one of the most powerful lobbying groups in the state. And, I've not yet made a decision about whether we stay in or we stay out. But one thing that I have learned is Allegheny County and Philadelphia County, while they are different from one another, the two of them are very, very different from the 65 other counties that exist here in the Commonwealth. So we should be thinking about our own policy changes with respect to gun laws, with respect to Juvenile Act. We just have a lot of different challenges that most of the other district attorneys in the state don't face.
And you mentioned the District Attorneys Association, you mentioned Philly. How have you thought about like how to avoid a Krasner trial, right? Because you're coming in as a reformer, even if the people are in agreement that we need reform within this county, you still have the Pennsylvania legislature. And even though there is that one point, it could go, right? So like, how are you thinking? Does that weigh on you as you're like thinking about making all of these changes if you win? Or are you like, if it happens, it happens?
Well, yes to both.
Okay.
Right? We're certainly mindful of what happened in Philadelphia, what happened to Larry, and really what's happening in a lot of states across the country. That being said, what happens. We are confident that the policies and procedures that we're going to roll out, because they are all centered around public safety, that we're going to be able to avoid a lot of sort of the drama that went along with Philadelphia. One thing I think that can be different in Allegheny than Philadelphia is, when Larry came into office, he was sort of by himself in that city. There, he didn't have a mayor that was going to work with him. He didn't have a police department that was going to work with him. I think he was by himself. Allegheny County is different, especially, with the incoming county exec. Hopefully we've got a good relationship with that person. We know we have a good relationship with the mayor. We've talked to the city of Pittsburgh police. I've talked to police departments. We're coming in not as somebody who's going to disrupt what everyone else is doing. We want to work and collaborate and partner with all system partners that we can all be in this together. Operating within a silo, which I think Philadelphia DA's office had to do in the beginning, I think that caused a lot of those problems and a lot of those tensions. That's something we want to avoid, first day in office.
We're talking about first day in office. What does that first day look like?
I'll probably walk into the wrong building, right? First of all. The first day in office is we come in and we talk about to the entire office what our management style is. And it will be what I've described my management style as at the public defender's office, which is, we're all familiar with like those organizational charts, right? So I guess at the public defender's office, I would be at the top of that thing. But when I talk to my folks and what I tell other people, my managerial style is I invert that. I view myself yes, as chief public defender, but really as like chief support staff. It is my job to provide resources and an environment where lawyers and staff can do their job with confidence because we've trained them, we've given them the resources in terms of technology and support and institutional knowledge that exists within the building. We want to have a supportive environment where you can ask questions and bounce things around. So my goal is not to come in and get rid of every single line process. We're not going to do that. There will be changes at the top, no doubt about that. But we want to come in and let people know that, the management style we want to support, one of, that office needs a lot of resources. Our public defenders are better resourced than the district attorneys because I know what they need. I've been in their shoes. I've tried cases. So the things we have now are the things I wish I had when I was a baby public defender. So, there's technology upgrades that we're going to get. We're not coming in to be antagonistic. We want to really provide support and create a good office and create a culture that can move our criminal justice system forward.
And these will be some short rapid fire questions just because when people know. How long have you been an attorney for?
16, a little over 16 and a half years.
Have you actually tried cases?
Yeah, many.
Roundabout figure.
Oh gosh, like jury trials?
Sure, we'll go with jury trials.
Oh, I mean 25.
Okay.
Yeah, homicides, yes.
We know you're the chief public defender. How many people are in your office?
So we have 100 lawyers and an additional about 60 staff.
And would you say you have managerial skills to run an office?
Yeah. So, I when I left the trial department, when I left like the trial lawyer, I was a trial manager and I managed 12 trial attorneys. I was one of 3 or 4 trial attorneys. I moved on to the pretrial department where I was that department's deputy. That's where we rolled out our bail reform and Project Reset. So we've got a lot of experience getting projects off the ground and working with stakeholders and, making sure that we're moving the PD's office forward. And I've been the director / deputy director for the past 5 years. So yeah, I've got some management experience.
You talked earlier about working with victims and talking to victims. Can you talk about some of your experience where you've had working with victim organizations or working with victims?
Yeah. So one thing that we've committed to is bringing victim services within the district attorney's office in-house. And on this campaign trail, it's I've worked in the system for a long time, so I'm not. I shouldn't be naive to this, but it's still so surprising when you go out into communities and you talk to moms who have so many have lost sons, and so many moms and dads who have lost sons to gun violence, but also to the criminal justice system as well. And, victims are so underserved in our justice system. And what else the justice system doesn't recognize is the trauma that goes along with violent crime, not just for the immediate family, the mom and dad and brothers and sisters, but the neighbors and cousins, and how that trauma can just reverberate and lead to more violence. And it can, so we want to bring victim services in-house. And one thing that really baffles me is, we only charge about half of our homicides. Because not that they're necessarily unsolved, but they go uncharged. That doesn't mean that there aren't victims there. And we should be serving those folks as well. It shouldn't just, victim services and victim relief and compassion for victims should not be limited to just folks who have a pending criminal case or are attached to a case. So we've just got to do a better job. I was watching the news. It was like 2 weeks ago where a mom lost her 24-year-old daughter. I think it was on the Parkway East, 24-year-old daughter. The case has been going on for 2 years. She has never spoken to a district attorney. She was notified via text that that the trial was going to be postponed yet again. Has never spoken. That is shameful. That is shameful. So we need to serve our victims better. We need to listen to our victims more. Yeah, there's just a lot of work to do there. And that's also part of building trust in the community as well, is showing that you actually care and that you have compassion. You understand that I mean, it's trauma that I really can't understand, I suppose. But, the district attorney's office has a lot of work to do there.
And talking about a lot of work, domestic violence is one of those areas that is very complicated. There's a lot of like recidivism in this area. And sometimes the victims don't feel comfortable staying long term. Have you considered pushing up some of the services when it comes for domestic violence? Because we know sometimes the batter's intervention may be 3 months, 6 months later. So looking at some of these cases, have you thought about the ways in which the office can try to help people who are impacted by domestic violence closer to the date of incident?
Yeah, I've said this for years. I think the prosecution, the most difficult unit in the district attorney's office to work in would be the domestic violence unit, because it's so complicated, right? You've got sometimes reluctant witnesses who are victims who don't want to go forward. Also, this goes back to some of our policy issues as well, which is in Pennsylvania, we don't have a domestic violence statute. So we have two options really to charge, either simple assault or aggravated assault. And, the statutory maxes on those two crimes are 1 to 2 years for simple assault and 10 to 20 years on aggravated assault. There's no in between. I agree with you. Batter's intervention. I mean, it's a 16-week long program. It's costly. It's obviously time consuming because it's 16 weeks. You're right. Those services aren't typically attached until, at least the first listing of the preliminary hearing. So that's probably 4 weeks after the incident. We've thought about ways of doing it at the public defender's office where we could get some of our clients into those programs earlier. That becomes tricky also with due process. You don't know how the case is going to resolve, but that's certainly something that we as a district attorney's office could offer in the process. There's also like lethality assessments that police officers can do to sort of gauge like risk involved with this, but those are tricky as well. I'm not going to tell you that I have figured out what exactly we're going to do with domestic violence in a unit and how we would change things. But it's super complicated. You've got, there can be economic dependence, there can be ongoing verbal and mental. It's super tricky.
Understanding. As I wrap up with a couple more questions before Ross takes over with the audience questions, we know here in Allegheny County there has been issues when it comes to the trans community of people being misgendered in court and not being made to feel comfortable. As you talk about the culture change within your office, what is your plan to reach out to that community as well as ensure that community has dignity when going into the courtroom?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because we've seen bad stories, especially with how the jail classifies folks and where they choose to house folks. This is where it's important to have diversity, including LGBTQ, but especially trans folks working in the office and advising on policy and helping with that. And this is where this ongoing dialogue and open line of communication must exist, because, the criminal justice system, any policy change, any sort of shift, it always hits marginalized folks the hardest. Like I've seen that as chief public defender. Like anytime the DA's office wants to change something or court administration wants to change the process, our clients always are the first to suffer. So, that's where we want representation in leadership in our office. We need diversity. We need folks. We need their voice in leadership in our office.
We talked a little bit about day one, but we're gonna go to day 30. What is the priorities of prosecutions, investigations for your office?
By day 30, we want to have, first and foremost, we want to have our director of training, director of recruiting in place. We want to have all of our management, all of our leadership positions filled. We want to be able to look at an organizational chart and say, this makes sense. But with respect to like our policies and charging and that kind of stuff. Oh yeah, that stuff. I plan to have that in place, ready to go on day one.
Talk about some of those, or you want to wait? We can.
Yeah, let's.
We can wait.
Yeah,
It's fine because the people probably should know first
Mhm.
before public. But lastly, my last question is, what do you hope your campaign accomplishes in this race outside of a winning result? What do you hope your campaign accomplishes when it comes to this district attorney's race?
Well, I mean, you said not winning, but I mean, obviously, we started this campaign because I know we need to reform our system. It's not working. And, if we can accomplish anything, I think that we've done a good job so far of explaining to folks where we're failing and why we're failing. And, we've been all over the county, and we talk about the same things regardless of the neighborhood we're in, regardless if we're in the East End or the Hill District or Fox Chapel or West Mifflin. We talk about the same thing. We talk about getting, low-level nonviolent folks out of the system. We talk about, having a district attorney that acknowledges racial disparity and understands that, that is an issue that we are obligated to address. And, how we want to not only just respond to and prosecute violent crime, but how we want to invest with partners in ways to prevent it. So, if we're not successful, although we will be, we are going to win this election. But we have started this conversation and we have maintained this conversation. I think our message is I think it's the correct message. I'm happy and proud that we've got a lot of national partners who are amplifying that message for us. So we're getting it out there. I think there will be more folks in Allegheny County who know that our criminal justice system is currently failing now than they did before we started this. So I feel good about that, but we are in this to win it.
I appreciate that. And I'll bring Ross Tedder up, who's looking at the social media and everything, and we'll ask you some of the audience questions. We'll walk around. Safety is of importance. It's okay. You can just move the table. Thank you all for your patience.
All right, thank you, Miracle. Thank you, Matt, for being here again with us tonight. We're gonna move into the audience Q&A portion of tonight. I guess I should probably introduce myself. My name is Ross. I serve as the civic engagement coordinator here at One Hood Power since December. So we just had a really good talk, really good discussion of a lot of the issues that sort of are facing Allegheny County, how the people who sit in the DA's office can sort of fix them. We're going to open it up to the audience here in the room with us. There are a couple online as well that folks watching on Facebook and YouTube have given us. This first one is from Beth, who lives in Pittsburgh. What would you say is the biggest difference between the current DA's office and how you would operate the office? And I'm going to actually auxiliate this question a little bit. I'm going to add to it, how would you explain that answer to someone who sees the DA's office as just a part of the same corrupt system that locks a lot of people up?
Yeah. So I get that question is asked a lot. So first and foremost, I answer it by saying this: we're going to show up every day. Right now we have really an absentee district attorney. And, you've seen it well, you've not seen it on the campaign trail because, I've been at over 125 events now. I've seen him 3 times. And that's consistent with the leadership over the past 4 years. We went through one of the most, the pandemic really shook the criminal justice system, as it did every industry, every life. But, we had to shut down court. It was really tough. And there was no leadership from the district attorney's office. Never saw him, never heard from him. As violent crime started to rise in the second half of 2020, as it did in 20, and then in 21, in 22, no presence from the district attorney's office. We have seen repeated examples of bad decision making, constantly, failing to acknowledge or dismissing racial disparity. No solutions except, to place blame, whether it's with the city of Pittsburgh or the mayor or whomever. Kenny Wood. We were there for opening day. It was great. I said that neither the rain nor Zapala could keep us away. But there's just no leadership. There's no leadership, and there's no interest in being a member of the community. And that is what the district attorney's office needs. That is what Allegheny County needs. Everyone's crying out right now about, the crisis in the city of Pittsburgh with respect to homelessness, the rise in violent crime among youth. Our district attorney is nowhere to be found. And, he's painting himself as a reformer. I mean, I find that laughable. He points to these treatment courts and problem solving courts, and he talks about the 12 or 11 courts, however many he's talking about. When the most recent treatment court was?
When?
2009.
Whew.
So,
I was 9 years old.
Yeah. Right. So point to me one example, one incident where we've seen reform in the last 14 years. And every single one of those treatment courts, like we talked about before, every single one of them needs to be reformed now. Drug court, the most talked about. Oh, drug court is so great. It was created in 1998. I'm older than you, but I was a senior in high school. We will not see anything different. He has been in office for 24 years, a quarter century, and he's asking voters to elect him to a 7th term so he can serve 28 years. But he doesn't have the respect for voters to show up and answer questions. I've been at all of these forums across the county, and I've sat next to an empty chair 12 times. So we're going to show up. That's the big difference. And another big difference is I've actually worked in the criminal justice system, meaning I've tried cases. I've been in courtrooms. I've been in every courtroom in that courthouse. I've been in every magistrate office across the county. I know what it means to take a case in front of a jury. I know what it means to represent a client. I know what it means to see victims and how the criminal justice system fails them. So we're going to bring real experience. We're going to bring real accomplishments as well with respect to our efforts with bail reform and, technological upgrade. I mean, like boring managerial stuff, like getting our people, connectivity during the pandemic and making sure that we can work with the jail such that we have video visits. So we always have access to our clients. We're going to show up. And, the last thing I'll say about this with respect to showing up, you know how I got my job at the public defender's office?
How was that?
I put in an application and I was interviewed and I got the job. I didn't know anyone. I had no contacts. I didn't do anything. And why I was appointed chief public defender? Because I earned it. I don't know Rich Fitzgerald. I'm nobody's nephew. I'm no one's grandson. And, I know what it means to work in this system. The only reason I'm sitting here today talking about how we would make a better alternative for district attorney is because I've been showing up every day for 16 years. every day to serve the clients that I was assigned to represent, and to make sure that we had reform in this system. So that's the difference. That's the difference we're going to bring.
Yeah. So I want to open things up to the audience. And because I don't think we have a third mic here, I'm just going to ask folks to stand up and project their questions. Ime is telling me vehemently no. Online. Let me see if there's another one in the comment section or on the forum. Folks watching on YouTube, on Facebook, in the comments of Facebook, there's a link to submit questions for this forum right now. You can also just drop them in the comment section. So the second question, and which you kind of already addressed, and this is from the forum. Yeah, how would you specifically address the adultification of youth in the justice system? And I know you kind of addressed this answer before, but for folks who might like that framing, I guess could you give an answer to that?
Sure. So the Pennsylvania Juvenile Act, really does dictate where charges initiate. But the district attorney's office does have a role in, consenting to, moving those cases back into juvenile court. It is my preference to prosecute children like children. We know about brain development. We know that 18 is really an arbitrary age to call someone an adult, which is why not only for our juveniles, we want to think about the decisions we're making with respect to our 18 to 25-year-olds, because you're still at really, we've got brain development going on until that age. So, we want to give even adults who are still who still are thinking like children, the opportunity to resolve their case without lifelong consequence, right? So we want to think, we want to treat our kids like kids, but we want to be mindful about how we're resolving cases. But one thing we can't ignore, one thing we absolutely can't ignore, is we are seeing, more violence from much younger kids right now. And we can't just we can't just respond to that via the criminal justice system. It's not going to work. We have seen for decades, you will not arrest, prosecute, and punish your way out of these issues. These are systemic, these are structural, which is why the partnerships and collaboration and, to really work with the folks who have resources where we can start investing in communities, be an advocate for the fair and equitable funding of our schools, to give kids an opportunity to give them alternatives to this type of behavior.
Yeah, understood. I see some folks here typing away, so I assume that we'll get some more in a second here. But as we continue on, this is kind of, I don't want you to take this question the wrong way, or I also don't want you to answer this the wrong way. What do you think is different now about this campaign, about this moment, than 4 years ago, where we actually had two different progressive candidates running at various different points during the year? What do you think is different about that moment than now?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we've obviously, our campaign has gone back and looked at that race, right? We've been really intentional about sort of going back, looking at margins and where votes were. But I do think we're in a much different space than we are now. I think we, as what people would call progressive or reform-minded folks, I think we've learned a lot in terms of organizing and messaging and social media and I think the message is reaching a broader set of folks, but also just look at like really recent examples. You take a look at what happened in Wisconsin with the Supreme Court race there. The progressive candidate won by 10 points, because I think folks understand sort of what's at stake right now. Obviously, we had the George Floyd murder in 2020, which happened after the 2019 election. So criminal justice was really brought to the forefront of the national conversation. But we saw big voter turnout last year for our congressional races with, electing Summer Lee and, Chris Deluzio and John Fetterman, and, Fetterman, winning a statewide race, and really on a lot of criminal justice reform at a time when crime was in the news and it was trying to be vilified. So, we're projecting a really healthy turnout for this primary. And, what we have seen also is, what we were able to do by going out and really undercutting Zapala's traditional base of support, which was the committee. I'll be honest, there's a lot of committees who are really interested in reform and really interested in seeing change in county leadership. So it's a much different race than it was in 2019. But in many ways, I think we're in a better position now than we were in 2019 to win.
Yeah. So I'm hearing that you think a lot of the infrastructure and the energy is different than it was 4 years ago, just with the advent of folks like Summer, folks like Sarah, folks like Ed Gainey and whatnot. A large part of that movement, aside from just winning and getting quote unquote better people in those offices, is getting people who are interested in the idea of co-governance, right? You've talked about seeking out that accountability. How do you envision yourself taking part in co-governance in an office like DA, in which your job is kind of like explicitly to hold like constituents accountable? You know what I mean? Like how do you co-govern in a space, where you're sort of meant to kind of like give people decisions that they might not like or might not agree with?
Yeah. So just from like right off the bat, in terms of co-government, let's talk about the plan for. So most district attorney's office have district attorney and one first assistant. I want to change that model to we're going to have two first assistants, because there should be an odd number of folks. So I know that's not co-governance, right? But that is, the idea is that we have more perspectives, and it's not necessarily, that we can work collaboratively that way. And we want to, have folks who bring different viewpoints to the table. But yeah, you're right. It's a little bit different, but if we are to be trusted, or if we are to move this system forward, it must be with the input of the community. Yeah. And, we can have the best of intentions, and we can roll out policies and, charging decisions or that we think will have an impact, but it could have the exact opposite impact. We want to make sure that what we think is happening, and the only way to know that is by having communication, consistent communication with folks who are being impacted by it. So yeah, that's why public forums, that's why meeting, quarterly with our stakeholders and our community advisory board, that's really, really valuable.
Yeah. For those of you watching, wondering why I have not jumped back to the audience questions, my phone went kaput, unfortunately. So my phone's dead. To that end, right, to talking about bringing in the most affected, right, I want to say the question that Miss Danielle had sent to me prior to my phone dying was about, reaching out to those areas, right? A huge part of why, 2019 was lost was because of poor performance in the Mon Valley, right? West Mifflin, McKeesport, Clareton, right? All those areas that, have a large Black population centers, predominantly working class. What are you doing to reach out to those communities in particular?
Yeah, so we were in West Mifflin last week. We were in McKeesport the week before that. We're going to we'll be in Braddock this Sunday. We're trying to be everywhere, and yeah, the Mon Valley has historically been not unrepresented, but like
I see. I remember.
Yeah, I
and I'm
mean,
from there.
yeah, like whenever we go there, it's always like no one comes here,
Yeah.
you know, and what we wanted, we work with Demetrius Baldwin, who is one of the most solid dudes I've met in this, and he's tapped into the Mon Valley, and he's really invested in seeing that, and he has put on and scheduled some great events for us, and it's a really, really big county, and we try to cover it all. And I'll tell you this, I know that we're doing better in the Mon Valley than we otherwise. The Kennywood thing really actually hurt. It's true. I mean,
Yeah.
we know this. So we're actually polling a little bit better in the Mon Valley than historically we would that it would suggest. We're yeah, the Mon Valley is Mon Valley. So I was when I was in the pretrial department, I did the Mon Valley. So that was my route. So I had, North for Sales and Braddock and McKeesport and Clareton and Glassport and so yeah, I've got a little like soft spot for the Mon Valley. So Demetrius he's holding us down there.
Thank you. So, okay. So this question that I was kind of trying to ask before, no, actually that was the question. All right, awesome. Appreciate you guys being with me here. What's your perspective on police regionalization, right? Allegheny County has a ton of municipalities. I think it's like 120, something like that. A lot of them have their own police force. What is your perspective on that, and on like the issues that potentially causes, and the benefits of, potentially making those into larger departments?
Yeah, I think merging of police departments would be very beneficial. For a number of reasons. Number one, like you said, we've got 100, I think there's like 109 or like 130 different police departments in Allegheny County, each with its own chief, each with its own set of policies, each with its own set of procedures, different funding structures, some with body cam, some without, different training. It leads to just disparity. It's really, really difficult. They all have their own policies with respect to how long they keep evidence, how they get evidence to the district attorney's office. It leads to a lot of delay. That's going to be a county executive question. I would be a vocal supporter of that. I know no one wants to give up their title of chief, and no one wants to, you got your different uniforms and all that kind of stuff, right? But I really think residents and folks in Allegheny County would be better served if we had fewer police departments where we could share resources, we could have more training, we could have, better services for both the officers and the public. I absolutely would support that initiative.
Are you prepared for like the full force of hell to fight you on that?
Well, like I said, I'll be on the back. I'll be like on the side of the next county executive saying, yeah, I agree, but not actually the one like, but no, I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, listen, part of that, being the public defender and being a public defender for this long, I'm really, really comfortable being in a room, being like the sole voice, like, taking one side of a position. Yeah. So, I was in chambers today, making a lot of people mad. So yeah, that's the way it goes. It's best for Allegheny County. It's best for the individual neighborhoods. And I'm not afraid to tell any police chief that I think he or she should consider merging with the town next to them.
Yeah. Okay. So,
and I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
We have a good example. I mean, Northern Regional, it actually works pretty well. They're a solid, in the North Hills. So there is an example of how it works well.
Yeah. So this next question, this kind of goes back to juveniles and the justice system, and this is particularly about the way we house our juvenile system entrance, right? in the county exec race, we've had questions just about the future of human, our former juvenile facility. What do you see as the DA's role being in that conversation, if there is one?
There's definitely one. And this is like, if any issue, whether it's in front of the county exec, the mayor, whatever, if it touches on criminal justice, then the district attorney must be present, must be an advocate for whatever the best position is. And, we don't hear that now. You don't hear our current district attorney talking at all about this crisis, and it is a crisis. So I've said, as both candidate for district attorney and as chief public defender, we do need a local detention center here. We need a detention center. And, there are some misunderstandings with respect to like the role that Schumann was actually playing here, which is, kids weren't spending a lot of time there. The average length of stay was about 12 days. So this is really like a cooling off, kind of calm down timeout period. And I'll be honest, some of these kids out here right now, they need a little timeout. Okay. Because I've seen it go bad both ways from a public defender standpoint. I have seen our kids who otherwise would have been detained go on to commit more serious offenses, and now they're sitting down in the Allegheny County Jail charged as an adult. I've also seen our kids who otherwise would have been detained become the victim of a homicide. So we need that facility. I've talked to enough. I mean, the chief of police association, they wrote a letter saying like, kids are well aware that there's no timeout spot right now. And I think that in some ways is contributing to the escalation in violence here. So the county really dropped the ball when it came to Schumann Center. They absolutely did. Now, the state shut it down, but the state was right to shut it down. It was run poorly. It was a poor culture. I mean, my God, a kid overdosed on fentanyl. How the hell does that happen? Right. So, but it shouldn't have been a shock when the state shut it down. And we were caught absolutely flat footed. And we're paying a price for that right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and we're going to have a new, I don't know if it's going to be at that site or whatever, but we have the ability, or at least the opportunity, to make it look a little different, right? Like, it's got to be locked down, it's got to be secure, but it doesn't have to feel like a jail. It doesn't have to smell. We don't have to treat kids like they're in jail. So there's an option to do things differently, but police, kids, not just, but police and parents. I mean, I talked to the parents who were like, hey, I help me out. Like, I can't stop this. So yeah, we need that facility like yesterday, not tomorrow.
Word. That's the end of our question, but I do have one more for you, and that's really just, can you make a promise that Kennywood will not be closed by the end of your term?
Kennywood will remain open. We will celebrate the 129th anniversary year 4.
All right,
right now
we have it. An endorsement might be in order. All right, y'all. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. We'll be back at it again May 1st for our county council forum, both at large and for District 10 and District 7. So please join us here at the Black Box. We're at 460 Melwood Avenue. Next week, same time, May 1st. The election's coming up in T-minus like not even 4 weeks. It's wild.
20 days.
20 days. That's terrifying as an organizer. I just had a small heart palpitation. May 16th is the election itself. May 9th is the last day to apply for a mail-in ballot. Super quick thing about mail-in ballots this year: the Allegheny County Division of Elections just started over-the-counter voting. So from now until May 9th, from 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., you can go downtown, apply for your ballot, receive your ballot, and then drop your ballot back off at the same place. So essentially, it's early voting. The last day to register to vote is May 1st. So if you know any youngins who haven't registered to vote, people who have moved, folks who have changed their name, those are all folks who need to register. So that's all I got. Matt?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I love talking criminal justice. I love talking criminal justice reform. This whole process has been new and interesting, but we're really excited. And get out there and vote.
Yeah. All right, y'all. We'll see you next week.
Over the course of a few years, life yielded a crisis of pandemics, resulting in many reeling and searching for answers. Black men especially have had to grieve the passing of hip-hop icons DMX, Michael K. Williams, Biz Markie, and many others. How has this impacted Black men? How has this altered the way they see themselves, their ability to express themselves, and their mental health? We sit down with Black men raised on the culture of hip-hop and ask them directly. Let's have a bite, take a step back in order to move forward. I'm your host, Miracle Jones, and this is Brunch with the Black Man.